Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to be talking about Kyrie Irving and just a new report that came out today. Well, at least at the timing of the recording, I'm recording it the evening, that we got the report of Kyrie being at an impasse with the Nets as it relates to his contract extension and just kind of the conversation, that got mentioned that the Lakers would possibly be interested in acquiring Kyrie if he was interested in leaving the Nets, or if they couldn't find a situation that worked out for them. And so, before I go in, if you guys can subscribe, helps the channel out a lot. I appreciate it. And as always, the channel continues to grow, and it's pretty awesome to see kind of the community that we've got growing here. So I appreciate you guys as always. I love all the conversations that we have. So. As always, I appreciate you. So this conversation about Kyrie is an interesting one because he's an incredible talent. He is a smaller shooting guard, but his stature doesn't really limit him in terms of ability. And he's more or less, he's a 50, 40, 90 player just at any point in the season. The largest issues with Kyrie has been because of the style of basketball he plays, some of the herky-jerky stuff that he does. He has trouble staying healthy. His knees, elbows, shoulders, that sort of thing. I think his first year with the Nets, he only played I think he missed 56 games. And then 2 years ago, because of the pandemic stuff was happening and there's other stuff that was happening, he sat out games both because of something health-related and just because of mental health related stuff. I think he missed 20 games, and obviously we know what happened with the mandate and stuff like that. So the Nets are now in this situation where they're trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do with Kyrie's extension. Now, mind you, I think some of this is happening because there are other players around the league, like James Harden, Brad Beal, even Russ to some degree, that as a Laker fan, you don't think the Lakers are going to extend him, but teams are probably trying to kind of wait each other out to see who's going to get what kind of extension. And I think Kyrie is also in that situation too as well. The Nets, I don't think they're completely against giving him an extension. They just don't want to fully guarantee an extension for however many, 4 or 5 years to the max and then risk something happening with him. And I think that's why they're at this impasse. But at the same time, I think the Nets may be waiting to see what Philly does with Harden, like what his extension looks like. Or even what the Wizards do with Bradley Beal. What happens, how much money does Zach LaVine get from the Bulls? All these guys, I expect the incumbent teams to bring them back, and that includes Kyrie and the Nets. I would expect them to bring Kyrie back. I think that's their first option. It's just getting to a number that makes sense for both of them. One of the things that I think always happens in these sort of situations, and you've seen it happen with Bradley Beal and you've seen it happen with Zach LaVine, and if you've been a Laker fan for a long time, you've seen it happen with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. Whenever a player of a superstar caliber or star caliber tier, even if it's a tier 2 guy, maybe a guy like Zach LaVine, whenever something like that happens, whenever they have an extension on the line because of a player option, or they're about to hit unrestricted free agency, stuff like that, the Lakers are always going to get mentioned as a team. And that's just always been the case. It's never going to change. I'm not saying this to say that Kyrie coming to LA is not a realistic thing. It's just, I would just, as a Laker fan, I would just temper your expectations, because these sort of things always tend to happen when there's a leverage play. And the reason why they do that is because Laker fans want good basketball players. So we may think to ourselves, that tweeting on Twitter and stuff like that, may just be us speaking into the air, and these front offices don't pay attention. But some front offices, not saying all of them, some front offices do care about fan sentiment, public sentiment when it comes to that sort of stuff. And not every fan and not every front office can withstand negative sentiment from a fan base, because you have to remember that for a lot of these teams, this is still a business, right? This is still there's if anything, it's not a typical business. There's equity that the team and the owners feel that they have to have with the fans. Because then if the fans don't like the product, or they don't like the team, or they really don't like the ownership, they won't show up to the games. You won't show up for playoff games, and you don't want to jeopardize that to some degree, unless you know for sure, whatever, by making this decision, you're going to be a better team. And then obviously winning cures all and stuff like that. In Kyrie's case, though, obviously him coming there, and he was a big part of recruiting Kevin Durant to the team. Like, I don't know how that relationship works if Kyrie's gone. I don't know how Kevin Durant would feel if Kyrie was gone. And I think that's also a big part of this entire equation. I know they traded James Harden for Ben Simmons, but I don't know how that relationship works. And from what it sounds like, Kyrie and Kevin do have some sort of influence. They don't make the decisions, but they have some sort of say in regards to what's going on. And from everything that the Nets have said, or Sean Marks has said, Kyrie is a part of that process. So it's kind of strange that there's all of a sudden this news out that there's an impasse in regards to their extension. I think it's just posturing. I think what's happened is Kyrie needs to apply pressure because it's getting close to his player option execute. I think they're like a week away from deciding whether to opt in or not, and he's applying pressure to the Nets front office to send a better extension offer in his way or something like that, and whatever it is. And as much as Kyrie has this third eye sort of thing, like if he's trying to use the media to sort of scare Nets fans into telling Joe Tsai and Sean Marks that they have to extend him, or their championship window's closed, or if it's to get Laker fans to rile up the trade Russ or trade whoever for Kyrie, it's going to work, because that's just how fans work. And Laker fans, whenever there's a star player that potentially wants to come to LA, we'll always welcome them with open arms. So that's not a surprise at all. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was just the realistic part. How realistic is it that the Lakers land Kyrie? And so the one thing I wanted to say is, from a financial standpoint, it is realistic in the sense that we have enough money to send out to trade for Kyrie. So that's not a problem. Really, the question is I don't think the Nets want Russ, right? Russ would probably be the guy. Actually, Russ is the guy that you have to send out in order to land a guy of Kyrie's caliber. So for this episode, I want to talk about two things, what the math sort of looks like behind it. And then the other thing is whether it actually makes sense. Now, this is just my opinion as to what I think the Lakers need to do, what the Lakers need to do in order for them to be successful next season. And it's not me saying, as much as Twitter likes to do this with a lot of my tweets, it's not me trying to say I think one player is better than the other. I'm looking at it from a team perspective, what's happened with our team the past 2 years, and what's the formula based on what I've seen in the playoffs is the best way for us to go about it. So those are the two things I want to talk about. So the first thing is, can we get Kyrie? Well, we can. I don't think they want to trade. They don't want Russ. I think that's pretty clear. I think Russ is, if you've seen my other videos, I've already said that Russ's $47 million expiring contract has a ton of value. So I don't think because it's an expiring contract, so I don't think that's really an issue at all. I think if there was any sort of situation where the Lakers were going to acquire Kyrie, it would involve them sending Russ to a third team. So I think that's really the only way that this happens. I would be very, very shocked if the Nets were open to just straight swapping the two players for each other. 1-to-1 makes almost no sense because the Nets would be taking on more salary. Kyrie, I think he has a trade kicker of about 10 or 15%, which means that, and that's something that the Nets would have to pay. The Lakers can send them cash to pay it, but what would end up happening is the difference because the Nets are a repeater tax team, it would just cost them too much money. So I don't think that they would do that 1-to-1. There is a situation where the Lakers could offer to take more salary back. So if they trade Russ, they can, before the season turns over, they can take on up to $55 million. So the Nets could trade Kyrie and Joe Harris and get out of close to $56 million. So whatever Kyrie's getting paid, what Joe Harris gets paid, plus his extra years or whatever it is, and then take on Russ. So you get some immediate savings of about what is the number, like of about $11 million for next year. So they save money, $11 million next year. And then obviously Russ would come off the books, or they could buy him out, and then he would come off the books for even less. But that's still a lot. That's a very far step to go, and we don't know how would KD think of that. What would the rest of the team think of that? What would fans think of that? That kind of stuff does matter to some degree. So if they do pursue Kyrie, I would imagine it's going to go in that manner. It's going to have to be a third team, probably a team like Oklahoma City, and they'll absorb. They have enough cap space to absorb. And the one interesting thing I will say is that if Oklahoma City isn't planning on keeping Shai Gilgeous-Alexander long term, just because that's just not a guy that they have with them in the future. If they draft Chet Holmgren, if they like Josh Giddey and they prefer that he's like the ball handler and stuff like that, if they don't see him, then there could be an avenue where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander goes to a third team, Russ goes to OKC, and then that third team sheds unwanted salaries. It doesn't have to be the Nets. It could be a team. It could be another team. But in this example, you could see SGA go to the Nets, and this again, I don't know if this will happen, but SGA goes to the Nets, Kyrie goes to the Lakers, and then Russ goes to OKC, but OKC gets like a first rounder from the Lakers and gets like a first rounder from the Nets, right? Or maybe they get more from the Nets and the Lakers don't have to give them anything. This is just me making something up. I don't know if that's the case. They could do the same thing with another team too if they wanted to. Lakers and OKC, they could in that manner, but that's like the most realistic way I could possibly see something like that happening. Outside of that, I don't know if I could really see the Lakers trying to acquire him. Now, if the Nets are for sure at an impasse and they will not, if they're at an impasse and they're for sure not going to be able to keep Kyrie, they don't want to keep him, it's just too much of a bridge to cross for them, I could see a guy like Sean Marks reaching out, not helping the Lakers, but like working the lines to find a third team that maybe has unwanted contracts, that would maybe want to absorb Russ, and they take the bad contracts and Kyrie gets sent to the Lakers. So there's different ways that you can go about doing this. But as a Laker fan, the one good thing to hear is, like even aside from this Kyrie thing, and Kyrie's interested in coming to LA, whether it's real or whether it's a leverage ploy, like there is value in moving certain guys around. There is value to an expiring contract, because you've heard about Russ again possibly being of interest to a team like Charlotte. And a lot of people have been saying that, like, why would they trade him to Charlotte? They would jeopardize, LaMelo's future and stuff like that. That's not necessarily the case. Like, it all depends on who they are sending back, who they're drafting, who they're targeting in free agency, and what direction they go in. Charlotte could just as easily just tell Russ to stay home, that he doesn't have to actually come to Charlotte, and Russ can just get paid his money. You've seen Houston do this now. They're about to do it for 2 years if they don't move him. They're going to do that with John Wall. Like, if for Charlotte, the main thing is that they want to get rid of tax money, or long-term money, then and they want to free up positional minutes for a guy like James Bouknight, one of the Martin brothers, stuff like that, then they can do that. And then, so there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And so the same, it's included for the Nets. If they're just trying to get something out of nothing, then they could do that. I mean, they could trade for Russ with no intention to play him, just so they can hold him, and then use his expiring contract maybe at the trade deadline. Like, no matter what you think about Russ as a player, the contract being an expiring contract is still valuable. And teams, to my knowledge, they don't have to actually pay their tax bills until the regular season is over. So from like an asset management perspective, if it's too much for the Nets, if it's a bridge too far for the Nets to cross, then there's a way that you can move things around to make things better for yourself, from an asset management standpoint. The one thing that I haven't heard said that I think leads to some credence as to why Kyrie may want to come to LA is that Kyrie's not supposed to be getting his shoe extension. I think it was said that Nike wasn't planning on renewing, his shoe deal or extending his shoe deal. And I think if Kyrie landed on a team like the Lakers, Nike may actually turn around and reach out to him and want to possibly re-engage with him, just because LA is such a big market, and Kyrie's shoes are actually really nice. Like it's just I wouldn't be surprised like if that's something that's in the back of his mind too as well. Um, as you know, many players make probably more money off of their endorsements than they do their actual basketball contracts. And I don't think Kyrie is any different. Like I think he was making a good amount of money from Nike when it came to it. So like there's a business aspect to some of this that like you could see why he would possibly be interested in going to the LA market and stuff like that, if he wasn't able to get the contract that he wanted from the Nets. And I can also see why he's pressing to get as much money as possible from the Nets, because this may very well be his last contract in his career. Just because of the direction his career has gone, I don't know if his physical body is going to be able to keep up with the style of play that he plays, because he does get hurt. It's not like he's a 70-game player every single year or a 65-plus game player every single year. And you just never know what happens. So I understand why he's doing this, and I honestly think to some degree, I don't think this is like 90% a leverage play. I think there is some sincerity that he'd be wanting to come to LA if he couldn't get the contract he wanted from the Nets. But I think I would lean towards him wanting to stay with the Nets, just because he's comfortable. His family's out in Jersey. He's friends with KD, stuff like that. So, can we land Kyrie mathematically? Absolutely, we can. Does it have to be a third team? Does it have to be OKC? No, it doesn't. It can be a 1-to-1. It just depends on what it is that Sean Marks wants to do. It depends on what direction the Nets want to go in. And they're just different things that they can do. So I wouldn't count out the fact that if they do a 1-to-1 trade, Russ gets moved, his contract gets moved again by the Nets later in the year, because there will be teams at the trade deadline that will be close to tanking for the top pick, or that will decide that they want to tank for the top pick, closer to the trade deadline, and Russ's contract will be even more valuable. So if the Lakers trade it now, great. If they don't, it's just Russ's contract is just going to increase in value up until the trade deadline. So I'm not really worried about that. So that option will always be there, even if Russ is on the starting roster at the beginning of the season. If things continue to go sour with Kyrie and the Nets, then maybe they'll re-engage later or something like that. Who knows? So the next thing I wanted to talk about, though, was Kyrie's fit with the Lakers. Now, from a basketball standpoint, there's no issues with the fit. He's a small guard, so there's a little bit of concern about defense, but it's not any more concerning than you would have with Russ. The main concern that I have with Kyrie being added to the Lakers is it's not fully utilizing everything that we could possibly get. Like when we trade for Russ, if you watch any of the other videos, I've been saying that we should try to trade for multiple players, not just one player. And so I said a while back that trading for John Wall would have been the dumbest thing the Lakers could have done with Russ's contract. Trading for Kyrie is not that, because he's like I said, an all-world athlete, all-world scorer. But you're only trading for one guy, right? So unless you're trading for Kyrie and Joe Harris, or Kyrie and Seth Curry and Patty Mills or something, I don't know who else they would trade. You're sort of in this tough situation where you're just adding a guy. You're just doing a 1-to-1 trade, but you're not actually filling out the depth of the roster. So we're still limited with what cap mechanisms we have available, the MLE, the BAE, to improve this team. Outside of trading Talon or trading Nunn and stuff like that. And so I'm sort of against that idea, not because of if going for Kyrie was the only option that we had with Russ, or one of the last options, the worst options that we had for getting Russ in terms of trading for depth, then go for it. You should trade him. But if we can get depth, we can get 2-3 guys that can actually fill out the roster and do what Darvin Ham needs them to do. I think that would be much better. Just because my concern is just as a fan, like I don't know what AD's availability is going to be this season. I'm fully bought into Darvin Ham's philosophy about sharing the workload and how the workload will help preserve LeBron and AD's bodies. But stuff happens, and lately it's been Anthony Davis, not of any fault of his own. He's the one who gets hurt. And my concern is if Kyrie, for whatever reason, doesn't play, if it's something to do with COVID, mandate-related stuff, things could change in a heartbeat. There could be a variant that comes out and everything shuts down in LA County. Like, if he's not able to play because of that, or if he's not able to play because he himself gets hurt, we're right back in the same situation that we were last year, where everybody else has to pick up sort of the slack, and then their bodies start breaking down because of the play pace. Like, that's what's happened with LeBron. Like, every time AD goes out, LeBron has to pick up a bigger load offensively or defensively because of the schemes that they're running. And maybe that won't be the case in Ham's offense and defense. But because of that, it takes a toll on LeBron's body. And he ends up getting hurt. And then now we're just in a situation yet again where that happens. So ideally, I would like to try and trade, if we're going to trade Russ, to trade for more depth. Which means that Kyrie shouldn't probably, a straight swap, as tantalizing as it sounds, in my opinion, is probably not the first option that I would take. If we can turn around and we can trade trade Russ and bring back, the Charlotte one of Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, and maybe Mason Plumlee. That would be really good, because you basically have your starting backcourts right there between Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier, and then you get a high motor big, and then you get more mid-tier salaries that you can flip around. Now, if you trade Talon and you trade Nunn for wings, now the team's looking very different. You've got close to 6-7 guys already to build out that rotation that you want, and that's that magic number 8 that I've been talking about. We want to try to get to eight players that Coach Ham can trust in a playoff rotation, and then use the specialists, the other 7 roster spots, in the way that they want. We really, really need the depth. I think that matters a lot, especially for this specific Lakers team, because of Bron's age and because of the concern with AD's injury risk. But if we had nothing else, and the Nets were very intent on trading Kyrie to the Lakers, then for sure, absolutely, we should trade for him. But I think that is a valid thing. I think when we discuss these sort of things on Twitter, people just think it's just Kyrie versus Russ. Kyrie's better than Russ, so you should make that trade. But we aren't comparing them in a 1-to-1 situation, where the way I look at it is, what helps the Lakers as a team in entirety, not just what gets rid of one guy that I don't like for another guy, or for one guy that doesn't fit for a guy that fits better. It still has to make sense. There's still other players, other spots on this team that still have to be filled out. Kyrie doesn't want to be a point guard. If you watch how he plays for the Nets, the reason why they got James Harden is so that James Harden could be the playmaker. They got Ben Simmons, they swapped a playmaker for a playmaker. So Kyrie's role would not change. Ben Simmons didn't play, but their goal is not to have, Kyrie's goal on that, or his role on that Nets team is not to be their traditional point guard. He gets the ball and he's looking to score. Does he make some plays out of his scoring attacks and stuff like that? For sure, but that's not his, he's not making plays, right, for his teammates. It just happens organically if teams double team him and stuff like that, or if there's an obvious pass or something like that. So that also begs the question for the Lakers. If Kyrie's not going to play point guard, what is the expectation of Bron having to be the guy who attacks the rim and passes to the shooters that are on the perimeter and stuff like that? Does LeBron want to do that? Because last time I heard, he doesn't. It's too much of a toll on his body. If you remember LeBron's exit interview, he said, they asked him what is it that he's looking forward to, working on in the offseason and stuff like that. And he literally said, I'm trying to figure out how to get more calls, get foul calls for myself, because he doesn't get them. If you see LeBron's drive data, he's driving to the rim less and less and less, and that's directly because teams are probably fouling him. Players are fouling him. I mean, if you watch the Laker games this season, he's gotten slapped in the face and there's just no calls. Like right in front of a ref, and there's just no calls. Like he's not getting calls, and so like if that kind of stuff matters from a basketball standpoint, like I think that'll be taken into consideration. I'm not saying that's the reason why we wouldn't get Kyrie. I'm just saying that there's more to basketball than just, oh, this guy's a better shooter than the other guy, so let's just boom, make the swap. There is availability that's a concern. There is a fit that's a concern. There's a fit within a system that's also a concern too as well. So obviously many of those things aren't necessarily an issue with Kyrie, but there's also a style of basketball that Kyrie wants to play. That's a big part for him. Like, is the way that Coach Ham wants to play basketball going to fit with the way Kyrie wants to play? Like, Coach Ham comes from a place where Giannis is the guy who's the main rim attacker for the team. So Giannis gets the ball a lot in his hands. Is that going to be Anthony Davis for us? Is that going to be LeBron James for the Lakers? How will Kyrie feel about that? If Kyrie has to play the Drew Holiday role and get the third most amount of shots? Or is he going to play the Chris Middleton role for the Lakers in that sort of offense if he gets traded? Those kind of things are all things that I think have to be taken into consideration. But ultimately, like I just think if we can get more depth, I think that would be way more helpful. But if we can't, and this offer is on the table, the Lakers should really go after it. So that's really all I had. I just wanted to talk about whether it's actually possible, like what are the actual math and cost ramifications of landing a guy like Kyrie. There's a lot of different ways that we can go about doing it, but I think the larger thing is this the right trade? Of all the trades that we could make, and obviously we only know what the media tells us, or what we get through the media, it's really on Rob and the Bus brothers who are in the front office to figure out what the best deal is. But does it make the most sense for us to trade for multiple players that give us depth, or does it make the most sense to trade for Kyrie? If our front office thinks that they can land productive wing players with the MLE, the BAE, with veteran minimums, if they think they can land those guys, then go for it, trade for Kyrie. But I think the formula of 3 really big salaries and then filling it out with a bunch of veteran minimums, because unless you're willing to spend $175 million in tax money too as well, like that's another thing. Like what the Warriors are doing, they have 4 max tier salaries in their on their roster. Like, I don't know if the Lakers would do something like that. Obviously, we tried to do it with 3 max tier salaries in our starting roster this season. So it's just a matter of like, what are they willing to do? What are they not willing to do? That sort of thing. And what are the options if we do decide to go this route? So there's a lot more than just trading for a certain guy. So regardless, it'll be interesting to see how this sort of works out. I think this is a little bit of a leverage play by Kyrie to get public sentiment on his side and to scare the fans into kind of, telling Josiah, hey, just pay up and keep this guy, and just go from there. So I'll be interested to see what direction that the Lakers go in, what direction that the Nets go in. But, ultimately we'll see what ends up happening, and we'll go from there. And we'll see what happens with all these player options and whatnot. So, as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you guys can if you guys can subscribe, if you can share it when you see me post it on Twitter, it's super helpful. And like I said, the channel continues to grow, and I love you guys for all the support that you guys are doing. I genuinely feel like we're building a smarter Laker community out here, and it's just cool to see everybody like kind of buy into that it's not all doom and gloom. So as always, I'll see you guys on the timeline, or I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.